John Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Before we get into the episode, just want to let you know that this is the free version of the podcast, and all that means is that we are way behind where I'm at in Patreon. So if you are loving this podcast and you need more John Constantine in your life, definitely go check us out at patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books and sign up for the Hellblazer tier, where you'll get access to the entire Hellblazer library that I've recorded so far. And also you'll get access to the exclusive episodes of the Planes, Trains, and Comic Books main podcast. So if any of that sounds good to you, definitely go over to patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books, all one word, and sign up there. And with that out of the way, let's get into the issue. Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are reading Hellblazer number 37. And just a little catch up on what's been going on in the last couple issues. John has been having a hard time of it. He went on a bender where he got high and drunk and then showed up randomly at the camper door of his friends Marge and Mercury. And he was pretty much there just to manipulate Marge into sleeping with him and using her to make him feel better about himself. And while that was going on, Mercury, Marge's daughter, was outside of the camper, and she is psychic, so she was feeling all the emotions and messed upness of John in the camper, and she was angered by this. So when John was finished with Marge and he came out to talk to her, she used some of her powers and pulled John into a possible future where John was an old man who was dying of cancer in a post-apocalyptic world. And that future ended with John being eaten alive by sharks. And because of this, in the real world, John's body actually started to suffocate and he almost died. But luckily, Marge came out and was able to save him before he did completely die. And at first he was mad at Mercury, but then he kind of laughed it off, and then they all walked away together, back to the camper all together. So it seems like they've made up and they're going to be traveling together now. So we start off issue 37 with the cover. There's a naked man on his side and he's laying against something that looks like two pieces of meat, but the way that they're arranged kind of makes it seem like they're wings or possibly like he's an angel. But we can see hooks coming out that are grabbing the tops of it. So it does look like meat and it's hanging down from some sort of hook. And then he is bound to them by some sort of wire or rope. And this issue is written by Jamie Delano with art by Steve Pugh. And if you listen to our main Planes, Trains, and Comic Books podcast, you might remember this issue from, I think it was last year's Halloween, possibly the year before. I can't remember. We do so much of them. But we covered this issue and the next because they are a two-part story. But in that podcast, we just kind of did like a quick overview of it. So hopefully you get a little bit more out of it this time. So we start off on the first page with a boy named Martin. And he is waking up in a house that is on a farm, but he's not getting out of bed because he is actually dreading this day. And that is because it is his birthday. And while most birthdays are happy, he does not have a very good family life. And he knows that his dad is going to be terrible to him. So as he procrastinates getting up in bed, he can hear his dad in the bathroom getting ready. And the narration says, "His father sounds cheerful. It must be a killing day." Tension begins to knot his stomach, but he forces himself to snatch one more restless respite of sleep from the inevitable morning. So Martin's able to snooze for a little bit longer, but he is awoken for the final time to the sound of a meat slicer going off in the shop below. The narration continues, "Sleep abandons him, but he still can't force himself to rise. He needs to piss, but he can't face the bathroom. The soapy stubble scum, the excess Preparation H finger smeared on the basin, the thick, dead, lingering smell of shit, the smell of his father. Martin's throat tightens at the thought of him, but he'll have to leave soon to fetch the beasts. Maybe today at least, the torment of breakfast can be avoided." And under this narration, there's some panels where we see that his dad runs a butcher shop named Archibald Ackland Butcher. So I'm assuming his dad's name is Archibald. And his dad is cutting up some meat, and he's also preparing some organs for his son to eat for breakfast. And he brings them to the kitchen for the mom to cook, and he says, "Here, mother, cook this up for the boy." And she protests, saying, "Oh, Archie, can't you leave it just for today?" And Archie walks up to her and puts the bloody meat in her hands, and he says, "Just shut up and fry it, you stupid mare. I'm sick of his nonsense. It's time he grew up. And if he gives me any of that meat as murder manure, I'll bruise him, birthday or not." And his dad is one ugly fellow. He's like a very large man, and he He's got like one dead eye, and he's just a very hateful looking person. And this seems to be the main conflict here. Martin is a vegetarian or vegan, and his dad really doesn't like that because he is a butcher, and he doesn't understand or care to learn why his son thinks the way he does or care about his son's point of view at all. So Martin eventually comes down to the breakfast table, and when he does, his father greets him by saying, "Ah, there you are. Stop moping like a sick heifer and get your food down your neck." So Martin sits down at the table, and his mom brings over this plate of freshly cooked meat and organs, and she's trying to make him feel special because it's his birthday. She says, "Happy birthday, son. I left a little gift out near your bike." But Martin turns to her and says, Thanks, Mom, but you know I can't eat this." And when Martin says that, his dad gets angry and stands up and grabs a fork and sticks it in the meat and waves it in front of Martin's face and says, "You better eat it, boy. That's prime meat and fresh offal. It'll thicken you up, liven your juices." And he grabs Martin's shoulder, and I should say that Martin is kind of like a skinny, small-framed young man who's kind of gaunt, and he's got long hair. So as his dad waves the meat in his face, he says, "What a specimen. Look at her. 18 years old and thin as a starved bitch. Eat it." And he proceeds to shove the meat into Martin's face, trying to force him to eat, but it's kind of just rubbing on his mouth. And of course, Martin is shirking back in disgust, and his mom tries to defend him, saying, "Leave him alone, Archie." But Archie just pushes him away in anger and says, "Shut up. Just shut up, you stupid fat sow. It's high time I pulled him off your teat. Eat it, boy. You'll need the energy. I've got a present for you, too. You're coming with me today." And then he throws the plate of meat on the floor towards Martin, and he pulls a knife out of his waistband because he's a butcher. I guess he has it on him. And he walks over to the mother who's crying, and she's facing away from him. So he comes up behind her, and he puts his hand creepily kind of down her blouse, and he runs the knife up her leg, and he hooks it on her bathrobe, and he continues to run the knife up to her waist where he's kind of holding her hostage. It looks like he's about to sexually assault her. And then he says to Martin, who's behind him on the floor, "You're a man now. It's time you did a man's work." And man's work is the name of this issue. So then we cut away from that horrific domestic abuse situation to a road next to a wildlife reserve where Marge and Mercury's camper has broken down and John is trying to fix it. And if you know anything about John, he's not a very handy person, at least when it comes to like mechanical stuff. If you want magical stuff, he's your guy. But if you want a wrench turned, that is not what he does. So John and Marge are under the camper trying to fix it, but they're having no luck, and they're arguing with each other because John doesn't really know what he's doing. Marge even tells him that a blind man with no arms would be more help. And while they're underneath the camper arguing, we see that Mercury has kind of wandered off into the wildlife preserve. And it's funny because she's supposed to be making them coffee, and John actually calls out saying, "Hey, Merc, how's that coffee coming?" "Merc?" But she's already gone and walking around in the nature area, and the narration says, "Time to make herself scarce. Finding out there's no coffee could just be the last straw. She's already in the doghouse for keeping them moving half the night. Marge must be exhausted after hauling them through the dwindling maze of back roads. There's a good reason for bringing them here, wherever here is, but Mercury can't explain what it is. She doesn't know herself yet." So we find out through the narration that while deciding where to go to next, Mercury told them that she had an intuition that they need to come to this area. But she doesn't know why, she just has a feeling about it. She's also regretting how she treated John in the last issue, and while she thinks, the narration says, life on the road had been improving daily since John had started to relax. Her too, if she was honest. They were starting to find the flow again. Pushing John towards his terror had been a monstrous thing to do. Even here alone, the memory of her arrogance colors her. Sometimes she must come on as a horribly precocious brat, and it's all just an act. She doesn't really know anything. Marge had been pretty frosty with her for a while, but John had been great. He nearly died, but he just shrugged it off. He said he'd have done the same himself. And apparently John has been talking to her and trying to help her understand her psychic powers better. And he's been saying that she can use her terror as fuel, but also that she needs to be careful because it can be addictive and you can burn out your sensors. And she understands what he's saying, but she's not sure she agrees with him. She doesn't understand why it has to be terror that she would focus on. Why can't it be love or hope? So while she's wrestling with these ideas and in her own thoughts, we see that someone is watching her with binoculars from some bushes. And we see that that person is actually Martin, and the binoculars are what his mom gave him for his birthday. But what he doesn't know is that Mercury's psychic, so she can actually feel someone watching her, so she gets up and moves. and Martin loses sight of her until she actually comes around the bushes and just says, hello. And of course, this scares the crap out of him, but Mercury doesn't really pay any attention to that and just keeps talking to him. So she asks to borrow his binoculars, and he lets her. And when he takes them off his face, we see that he has a black eye. And she asks how he got it, and he says that it's a birthday present from his dad. So they continue to talk, and Mercury tells him about John and about her mom, Marge. And they also introduce themselves to each other. And it definitely seems like Mercury is smitten with this boy right away. And he seems to be into her too, but of course he's kind of shy. So she's kind of controlling the situation, and she invites him to come down to their camper and have her mom, Marge, look at his eye. So as the two kids come out of the wildlife preserve, John and Marge are still arguing about fixing the van, and it seems they're going to be stuck there for a while because the camper needs a new radiator hose. And of course, they're kind of up in the middle of nowhere, so that's going to be hard to come across. So Mercury kind of runs up to them, dragging Martin behind her, and introduces Martin to them. And everybody says hi to him, but John, of course, looks at him and sees the black eye and says, oh man, looks like you need a steak for that shiner. Which is probably not the thing to say because he got that shiner from not eating steak. So Marge puts some ointment on the black eye of Martin, and then he and Mercury go outside to hang out while John and Marge talk. And it seems they both pick up on the fact that Mercury definitely fancies Martin, but other than that, they don't really know what to make of him. Then we cut to the conversation that Mercury and Martin are having outside, and Mercury asks Martin, so if you hate it at home that much, why don't you just leave? And Martin says, it's my mom, I suppose. I don't want to leave her on her own with him. And as he's talking, we see that there's a livestock truck pulling up next to him, and it is his father. And he's got a livestock truck full of pigs ready to bring to slaughter. So Archie sees Martin and says, get over here, boy. You've had long enough to lick your wounds. I told you, there's work waiting. And John apparently hears this truck too, because he comes out from the camper and sees Mercury talking to Martin's dad. And Mercury's saying, hello, you must be Martin's dad. I've been hearing all about you. And Archibald says, what of it? And then he grabs Martin by the hair, and as he does that, Constantine walks up and flicks a cigarette at him, and Archie looks over and kind of sizes up John and says, who's this bloody bunch of jippos you took up with then? Ruddy peaceniks, I'll bet. And John just looks at him and says, don't bank on it. And they're just staring at each other, posturing, trying to look tougher than the other guy. But then Archie sees that Mercury has gone around to the back of the truck and is looking at all the pigs in the back that are all scared and freaked out. So he drags Martin by the hair over there. And as he does, Mercury says to him, why don't you give these pigs some water? They're hot, crowded, and terrified. But Archie just goes up to her and says, mind your business, girlie. They don't need water. They'll be dead in a couple of hours, the slobbering beasts. And then he punches one of the pigs in the nose, because he's a total dickhead. And at that, John goes over to confront him even more, maybe escalate the situation, and he says, now you're a nice bastard, aren't you? But as he walks towards Archie, kind of aggressive, Archie yells the name Churchill, and that is the name of his super aggressive dog that bursts out of the passenger side window and begins to growl at Constantine. And Archie says, any closer and he'll chew you off at the neck. So John backs off, and he says a funny line where he says, Christ, I'm sick of dogs. And that's a callback to one of the previous issues. I don't remember. I think it's issue 33 or 34, where he's almost killed by a junkyard full of dogs. So Archie gets back into the truck along with the dog and Martin. And as he does, Mercury says, well, you know what they say, don't you? Big dog, small dick. And this cracks John and Marge up. But Archibald is super offended, and he says, you dirty mouth little slut. Her hide needs a tanning. And with that, Archibald and Martin drive away, and Constantine says, you certainly know how to pick 'em, Mercury. And Mercury says, it's not Martin's fault he's got a terrible father, is it? Just lay off, okay? And she kind of storms off, and then John turns to Marge and says, whoops, looks like love, Marge. And Marge does not look very happy to hear that. So she follows Mercury in order to kind of have a mother-daughter talk about this new boy that she met. So she says to Mercury, it's no good brooding, love. And Mercury says, I'm not. I'm thinking. He's really a nice person, Marge. I mean, really. I can tell, you know. And then Marge kind of gets a sly smile on her face and looks at Mercury and says, quite good looking, too. And Mercury says to that, yes, I thought so. And then they walk together for a bit, and Mercury says, it's not right. I can't stand it when things are trapped. And Marge says to her, well, we're trapped here until we can fix the camper. We'd better get moving, see if we can hitch to a town. And Mercury says, no, you and John go. I need to stay here. But Marge is not happy when she hears this. She's kind of worried for Mercury's safety. She asks what if his dad comes back. But it seems that Mercury's made up her mind. And Marge actually goes to John and asks what he thinks. But John just says, me? I don't know. Well, I suppose it's up to Mercury to know what she needs. So basically, John is no help to Marge at all in this situation, and Mercury's very happy because they've decided to let her stay there. And then we get to Martin and Archie, and they're pulling up to the slaughterhouse with the pig transport truck. And they're driving up a very bumpy dirt road, and the narration says, when Martin was a child, he'd thought hell was hidden up this rutted track, just beyond this blackened hedge of thorns. He still has his suspicions. And then we hear Archie talking to his son Martin, saying, you'll see, boy, killing's nothing to make a fuss about. Just something that has to be done so people can eat. It's natural. All them bleeding hearts going on like beasts or human don't know nothing. Animals are just meat and mess. We just slit 'em open, scoop out the rubbish, and bingo, they're bacon. That's the way to do it. Wait till you learn to cut, boy, you'll see. Nothing like steel in a sow's belly to make a man feel alive. And this is truly where the comic begins to get horrific. I mean, it was already pretty bad at the beginning, but in this shot, you see the dad being truly evil. And as he's parking the truck, you get a panel where you can see the pigs and their snouts are trying to get through any cracks in the wood of the truck. And you just see their eyes peering out and they look terrified. And it's truly horrific. So as Archie's getting out, we see there's other people there that are part of this slaughterhouse. And Archie turns to Martin, who's still inside the truck, and says, stop looking at me as if I was shit on your boots. And don't make an arse of me in front of the blokes. Remember, I'm the boss and you're my son. So Martin gets out of the cab and Archie introduces him to all the other guys. And he says, morning, lads. Here's the new girl come to be blooded. And that's how he introduces Martin to the guys. He basically calls his son a girl in front of them. And one of them's all creepy saying, pretty little thing, ain't she? Sweetmeat, but a bit thin in the hock. And there's an older gentleman in the group named Charlie who introduces himself by pulling out his fake eye and showing it to Martin and saying, your dad asked me to keep an eye on you. And they all laugh as Martin kind of turns around in horror, and you can just see he really, really doesn't want to be here. And then if the dad wasn't bad enough, while the other guys were razzing his son, he's gone over to old man Charlie's car and he sees there's a couple dogs in there that are barking, and he says, see your mutts are coming on strong now, Charlie. Anytime you want to put him up against Churchill, just give the shout. So on top of all the other horrible stuff that we've seen his dad do, he also fights dogs, just solidifying him as the worst person ever. So the dog tells Charlie to take the truck and back it up so that they can get the pigs ready and pointed towards the slaughterhouse. And Archie says to him, I'll go get the bloke started in the shed. You and the boy get him off into the pen. He doesn't know his arse from his elbow, so stay on him. And then we see that Martin has actually gone over to the truck and is looking at the pigs through the wood slats of the truck. And the narration says, the pigs are crying. There's no other word for it. Crying and whimpering with terror. They know. They can smell death. This place reeks of it. Again, the image of the girl, Mercury, eases into his mind. Her eyes are clear and kind, but reproachful and accusing. Martin has always known that he isn't part of this. But before, he'd never known anywhere he'd rather be. But as he's thinking this, Martin's thoughts are interrupted by Charlie, who walks over and says, stupid, ignorant things, ain't they? Make me sick, they do. All shitting and squealing and stinking. Wait till we start the killing. They'll really kick up a rumpus then. Set you right on edge. You just have to go crazy. Stun 'em, string 'em up, bleed 'em, and gut 'em. It's blood up to your armpits and brain in your hair. Afterwards, you feel good, calm. When it's all gone and quiet and your dad's passing around the bottle, it might give you a queer turn since it's your first time. Best get the stench out of your lungs quickly. Keep your breakfast down. And with that pep talk, I guess, Charlie gets in the truck and begins to back it up. And he tells Martin that he will shout when he is ready for Martin to open the gate. But as we've seen in Martin's previous thoughts, he is having an inner struggle of what to do here. And the narration says, only following orders. If he doesn't cooperate, it'll happen anyway. Maybe he can make it easier for them. He feels strange. There's a pressure, a ringing in his head. He can almost feel her, watching him, waiting for him to do what's right. And right here, he decides to not go along with what's going on. So he opens the gate on the truck early, and he lets all the pigs out, trying to get them to go free. And then we cut to Mercury, who's still waiting in the camper. And just like he was thinking about her, she's thinking about him. And the narration says, how can she like him? His father's a mad butcher, and he's gone off to work in a slaughterhouse. Mercury feels infatuated, like someone in a romance novel. She doesn't even know him, but she knows he's what brought her here. He's the trapped thing she's supposed to free. So with that, she gets the binoculars that he left there, and she goes off to find Martin. And she's mostly doing this by using her psychic intuition. As she walks, the narration says, Yes, if you are quiet and still, if you lay your hand to the ground, you can sense it, the heavy, somber pulse of sickness. If you sniff even the briskest wind, you can taste it, faint but sulphurous. If you listen hard, you can even hear it screaming. And if you open your eyes wide and look, the mad, bad ugliness leaps out at you like death. And at the word death, she puts up the binoculars and she looks at the slaughterhouse and she sees Martin grabbing his head as if he's in pain. And we see the men have already gathered all the pigs that ran off into one pen, but there is one stray pig that is getting mauled to death by Archibald's dog, Churchill. And when she sees this, she just comes running without any thought of her own safety and says, "Hold on, Martin, I'm coming." And then we cut down to the slaughterhouse where the men are finishing getting the pigs back into the pen area, and Charlie's saying, "Go on, get your fanny in there, you old fat slag," as he kicks the last pig into the pen. And then Charlie goes over to Archie and says, "That's the last of the silly bitches, boss, except for Churchill's one, that is." And then Archie turns to him with a very, very hateful face and says, "No, it ain't. Not quite. You missed the runt." And then Archibald goes over to his son Martin and picks him up and throws him into the pig pen and says, "You love the little piggy wig so much, I'll treat you like one. That's what happens when you marry a sow. You get pork for a son." And then as Martin is still in the pig pen, terrified, Archibald tells the other men, "Come on, let's get these whores dangling. Don't worry if they're still twitching a bit. We've got killing time to make up." And then we see the men get to work slaughtering the pigs. We see Charlie take a bolt gun to the head of one of the pigs and then string it up, and then he's going to swing it over to Archibald, who's got a knife, and Archibald says, "That's it. Swing her down. Come on, my fat beauty." And then he slits the pig's throat and bleeds it out, and as he's doing that, he's saying, "Come to daddy." And then we cut to Martin in the pig pen, and the pigs are freaking out because they're terrified. They're sensing the death that's happening all around them, and the narration says, "Blood, shit, rank sweat and terror. Wide, horrified eyes, hard, bristling panic. Pressed with all the other dumb beasts, Martin scrambles, kicks, and struggles into the corner. Each of them is equally desperate to be furthest from the goading men, prolonging futilely the time of their helpless delivery to grinning oblivion." And the last panel is a very sinister shot of Archibald grinning evilly as he holds a bloody knife. And that is the end of this issue. Like I said, it will continue in the next one. And also, I should say, we are nearing the end of Jamie Delano's run. His run ends at issue 40. And then after that, we get to the run that is generally considered the best run of Hellblazer, and it is by Garth Ennis. And I can't wait to get into that stuff with you guys. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains and comic books, all one word, @gmail.com. And with that, we will see y'all in the next one.